hosting, and Professor Don Hoffman. I'm Amanda Masters, co-founder, owner, and CEO of Awake TV Network. I invite you to check out awaketvnetwork.live, where we host many videos and documentaries on science and spirituality, health and wellness, and many other modalities here to support you during these times. Enjoy the episode.
Hey guys, I'm Jen Hill, your host here at Conversations at the Intersection of Cutting Edge Science and Spirituality. Today, I'm excited to have you join us for a new conversation, Constructing Everyday Reality with Deepak Chopra and Don Hoffman. Dr. Deepak Chopra is founder of the Chopra Foundation, a nonprofit entity focused on research for well-being and humanitarianism, as well as Chopra Global, a medical company at the intersection of science and spirituality. Dr. Chopra is a renowned pioneer in integrative medicine and personal transformation. He has authored 90 books, with his 91st book coming out this September. Additionally, we have with us Don Hoffman. Don received his PhD from MIT. He is a professor emeritus at the University of California, Irvine, and he has authored over 120 scientific papers, including three books, including The Case Against Reality: Why Evolution Hid the Truth from Our Eyes. Well, guys, here we are for another conversation around consciousness at the intersection of science and spirituality. And we have a lot of topics that I think the viewers out there are interested in, from having read the many comments on Deepak's channel and Awake's channel. One of the things that I thought might be fun to talk about today and relevant to everybody in the world at large is the observer principle, and specifically the observer principle as it relates to the growing pandemic. One of the things that I would love to perhaps have you start with, Don, is to talk to us a little bit about what is the observer principle, and then Deepak, if you wouldn't mind going into how our observation of the pandemic is impacting or not impacting the pandemic directly. Don, what are your thoughts?
So by the observer principle, do you mean the idea that observation is a process of construction as opposed to reporting the truth?
Well, yes, pretty much the essence of your book, which is that the case against reality, that we're not seeing things as they are. And in fact, many scientists would agree with us, from what I understand, is that when we're conducting a scientific experiment, we're often conducting that experiment with a particular intention in mind. And if we get into the quantum physics principles of the observer experiment, I don't know if one of you would like to describe it for the viewers out there who might not be familiar with it.
Okay, yes. So very good. Most of us assume that perception works in a particular way. There is a real moon that exists whether or not anybody looks at it. And when you and I look at the moon, we're both reporting true perceptions about a true object that really exists, that's round, that's far away from us, and so forth. And we assume that there's one public physical object that we both see, namely the moon. And this assumption is given a technical term in quantum theory. It's one way of talking about it is called local realism, right? So local realism is the claim that physical objects like the moon or protons and electrons exist and have specific definite values of their properties, like position and momentum and spin, even when they're not observed. So that's realism. So our perceptions, our measurements in experiments, our perceptions in everyday life are reporting pre-existing true values of physical parameters, like position. That's realism. And locality is the claim that those physical parameters in space and time, like position and momentum, have influences that propagate no faster than the speed of light. And that's locality. Another assumption that can be made is that the values of these parameters don't depend on how we measure them. That's called non-contextuality. So if I choose to measure things in one way versus another way, with one apparatus or another apparatus, that the reality doesn't depend on what apparatus I choose to measure that reality. The reality is what it is. And it turns out that you might think, well, we can't possibly test these ideas. How could you test whether an object has its parameters like position, momentum, and spin when you don't look? You're not looking. So how could you have any empirical evidence to decide that question? And by the way, it cuts both ways. It cuts for those who say those parameters really do exist. The physical world really does exist when it's not perceived. And it also cuts against those who say it doesn't exist. It doesn't have those parameters, right? It's equally, the conundrum would be in both cases. Well, it turns out the conundrum has been resolved technically, right? So a guy named John Bell, a brilliant physicist, and also physicists named Kochen and Specker have used the mathematics of quantum theory to actually come up with some critical insights on this, and also some experiments that we can do. And the results are in. Local realism is false. Local realism is absolutely false, and non-contextual realism is incompatible with quantum theory. And so if quantum theory is at all on the right track, then the non-contextual realism is false. And so this means that, I like the way Chris Fuchs puts it, he's a physicist at Boston University. And he says that each act of observation is a moment of fact creation. Something new is coming into the universe with each act of observation. And so the observer principle is that observers in some sense are not merely passive observers of a pre-existing reality. We are creating reality, we're creating history by each act of observation. And so it's a very active process. And of course, the challenge then for scientists in physics, for example, is to understand the role of the observer, the role perhaps of consciousness, although most of the physicists that I talk with don't bring consciousness into their study of physics. They will bring in the notion of an observer, and it's usually just a technical concept. It's a positive operator valued measure would be the closest thing they might come to an observer. It would be some kind of operator that's involved in creating the outcomes in the experiments. So either some kind of von Neumann collapse or this positive POVM, but there's no real theory that takes the observer any deeper than that, typically in physics. So I should probably pause and let Deepak jump in.
All right, so Deepak?
Yeah, so actually very interesting what Don said about local realism, and he described very elegantly, I think, what would be a cutting edge scientific model for getting rid of all realism. How that pertains to the COVID pandemic was the question. So based on something that Don said, every observation is a construction. Okay, so every observation is a construction. Now, if I ask you to close your eyes right now, and I ask you to imagine utter darkness. Imagine you're deep inside a cave and you can't see anything. It's all totally black or transparent or whatever, but it has no form, okay? It has no form. That actually is the essential nature of reality. Yeah. However we want to describe it, in physical terms, you might say it's electromagnetic radiation that pervades the cosmos, but that too is a model. But essentially, reality is formless. Now, as soon as you open your eyes, you construct that particular picture, this picture, that picture. I can look at the Milky Way galaxy, that picture. You construct it in that moment. It's a snapshot. And this snapshot is very different from this snapshot or that snapshot or that snapshot. Each snapshot is an individual construction. We are speaking visually, but you could apply this principle to any of the senses. But let's just speak visually. So as soon as you open your eyes, you convert the formless into form.
Okay.
How you do that is Don's business. You know, you actually manufacture, in that moment, you create colors. And colors are shapes, and shapes are forms. And that's all there is. The rest is a story. That's a COVID virus, COVID-19. This is a hand. So the construction is not only of the scenery out there, or what we call the scenery out there. The construction is also the scenery that we call the physical body. It's part of the construction. It's part of the construction because the physical body is experienced in the same way as any other perception. Any other perception. How do you know you have a body? The same way as you know there's a COVID virus, or a hand, or a painting, or a star, or a galaxy. It's all a construction in the moment of perception, cognition, and then creating a story out of that. And the story is created by giving these snapshots of experience continuity. And the continuity comes from the presence of consciousness, which is in the snapshot and in between the snapshot. But consciousness by itself is like that darkness when you see your eyes. It's the observer, and yet without this observer, which is non-local because it has no form, it has to be non-local. Has to be non-local if it has no form. Yet without this formless, there is no form or experience of form. And because it's formless, it has to be infinite. Therefore, it has the potential for innumerable forms, from viruses to bacteria to fungi to reptiles to humans to primates. So we, the human body mind, and the COVID are a unified experience in non-local awareness, and all experience is happening even now in non-local awareness, even now. So where am I seeing you in non-local awareness? Where am I hearing you in non-local awareness? If I close my eyes and I don't see any forms or phenomena, what do I experience? Sounds? Does sound have a physical location in the world as a sound, as a vibration? The answer is no. What else do I experience? Sensations, images, feelings, thoughts. None of these has a location in space-time. None of these. Okay, so what is happening? The pandemic and the mortality from the pandemic is all about that which we have constructed originally, okay, including the human body. Going along with it, the human body, as most people think of the human body as a noun, it's a fixed anatomical structure, but the human body is a changing perception in the same way as anything else is. Okay, so once we recognize this, there are two ways of dealing with it. The spiritual way is everything is okay. Okay. Now, there's another way of dealing with this, and that is, this is our collective projection. And if you look at the correct collective projection, for lack of a better word, consciousness, at least as I experience it, projecting itself as experience, is projecting itself as a very entangled, but in a way correlated experience that we call the ecosystem. Okay, the ecosystem. Trees, flora, fauna, birds, bees, viruses, fungi, the entangled microbiome of the planet is what expresses itself as sentient beings, what Don calls conscious agents. And this matrix of conscious agents projects what humans interpret as the ecosystem of which they are also a part. We are part of the ecosystem, okay? So there's a biosphere that is being projected by non-local awareness, which is actually perfectly entangled as in the genetic microbiome of the planet. It's in us, it's outside us, it's in the earth, it's in the plants, it's everywhere. And that's the ecosystem. So one view of this pandemic is that the entangled ecosystem of existence, which we call the biosphere, which is here and everywhere, is stressed. And it's stressed because climate change, there's poison in the food chain, chemicals, antibiotics, steroids, extinction of species, and then all the other stuff, which is destroying the ecosystem. So the mutation that we call COVID-19, or any mutation, is a stressed ecosystem. Now, as we return to our cages, which we are right now, you're in your cage, I'm in my cage, Don is in his cage. The ecosystem is actually repairing itself. The birds are singing, the bees are back. They said 80% of the nutrition on this planet is from bees. And they were disappearing, and now they're back. So that means the ecosystem is repairing itself. The fish are returning to dead lakes. Even the canals of Venice have fish. People are breathing in Bangalore. Okay, the Himalayas can be seen from 500 miles away. So what is the ecosystem that we have projected in non-local awareness is saying, hey guys, when you come back, be a little more respectful, little less hubris, and more respect for this amazing entanglement of existence that we call the biosphere. Okay, and if you do that, the mutation will mitigate or become a permanent part of the ecosystem, or something else may happen. Right now, when you ask biologists the reason for mutations, they say they're random. But many people now in cancer research and other places are saying actually mutations could be due to a toxic environment. And that toxic environment includes everything that is projected by the conditioned mind.
So Deepak, I'm going to pause you for a second because I'm really curious about
actually.
What I'm really curious about, and it's something that I realize we've never talked about in these conversations we've been having, is the role that language plays in this. What would happen if the world stopped saying there is COVID, there is a pandemic, this is scary? Is there any sort of correlation? Don, you couldn't even be doing your mathematics unless you had a language to have that occur in, or the ecosystem that you're so beautifully and eloquently talking about, Deepak, that is regenerating itself. Is it possible that all of life exists not only in consciousness, but in our conversations about consciousness and about whatever it is, that thing that we're observing? Don, I would love to know your thoughts on that. Oh, hold on, Deepak, 1 second, go ahead.
Before Don answers, I have a very short response to this.
Okay.
When you're in the illusion, you go by the rules of the illusion. Okay. So you deal by those rules. I used to talk to my guru and I said there was this Swami who was being chased by a tiger and he was enlightened, or so-called, and he ran up a tree. And the tiger or the leopard chased him up the tree. So what happened to this guy? He was totally convinced that reality was a collective dreamscape. And my teacher, he said, dream Swami, dream tree, dream tiger, dream enlightenment. In ultimate reality, there's no such thing. But when you are in the dreamscape, you're a fictional character in the dreamscape, you better behave like all the other fictional characters, while you also know in the background that you are formless and have the potential to assume innumerable forms. But that's another story. So Don, please go ahead. I'm kind of going off on a tangent.
Well, that's a very good point. I like what you've been saying, Deepak. And I think that these kinds of questions are probably prompted by this kind of feeling that a lot of people will have. So you guys are saying that we create reality and it's not real unless you create it. Well, why don't you step in front of a train? Once you get hit by that train or hit by COVID and you're on a ventilator, then maybe you guys will rethink this stuff that you're creating reality, because reality is going to hit you in the face. right? So I think there's this kind of attitude that, look, it's all nice and good to talk about we create reality, but reality is going to come and slap you around and show you that it really is real, independent of whether you think you're creating it or not. And I certainly understand that attitude, and I wouldn't step in front of a train. And for very similar reasons to what you were saying, Deepak, I think that it's very important to make a distinction between our perceptions showing us what's literally true versus seriously. So should we take our perceptions seriously or literally? And that's an important distinction, right? To take our perceptions seriously does not mean that we have to take them literally. And we do this all the time when we're using, for example, your computer and a desktop, right? When you take an icon in the middle, you have a blue rectangular icon in the middle of the screen, and it's a file that you've been working on for a year, a book. You've been writing a book for a year. There's the file icon right in the middle of your screen. Well, would you carelessly drag that icon to the trash can and delete it? Absolutely not. Not because you take the icon literally. Your book is not literally blue and rectangular in the middle of your screen. So you don't take the symbols literally, but you do take them seriously. And that's sort of the way I think about this. So our perceptions are, in this simulation, are there to protect us, keep us alive, guide our behavior. So we have to take them seriously, but that doesn't mean that we take them literally. If you're playing a game of Grand Theft Auto, in virtual reality, well, you need to take, if you want to win the game, you need to take the steering wheel seriously, you need to take the cars seriously, the road seriously, but no one takes it literally. It's just a game. So that's the idea. So we're in this simulation. We have to take it seriously, or there are consequences. You exit the game, right? In the game, you lose your life in the game, but if you succeed, you get to go on to the next level. And so we have to take it seriously, but ultimately we are creating what we see. And we're also creating the feelings of pain, right? So if you do the wrong things, the tiger actually starts to eat your leg. That really hurts, right? So we have to take it quite seriously, but that's different from taking it literally.
Don, I just got something that you said that I think is really fascinating, and I'm going to hand it right back over to you, Deepak, after this. If you imagine, like, for example, instead of Grand Theft Auto, let's say we're playing a game of Super Mario Brothers or a game of life, and we have this virtual reality. If you want to imagine life as a virtual reality, whatever we're observing or looking for, if we turn our heads left, we're going to see what's to the left, but then all of those other possibilities just became no longer available to us until we look right again, which just got me thinking back to our last conversation, Deepak, about you going swimming in the pool, and you were saying how you hadn't swam for 25 years. What just hit me is, what if all versions of ourselves, what if space-time didn't exist? And what if everything was happening simultaneously? You take space-time out of the equation, all versions of ourselves are there simultaneously, but it's only the version of ourselves that we're looking for in that moment that's what we see. Does that make sense, or did I go way too far out there?
I want to address what you asked, what the question you asked. I want to address that, but also something that Don said, which is very, very interesting, actually. When we talk about headsets and virtual reality, here's an example. I can give you, and I did this myself. I mean, there's a organization in LA called Dreamscapes, and they are creating virtual reality stories. So you can go to Mars, you can travel in intergalactic space, you can experience, all kinds of things, scenarios in that. And so I went and tried out some of these VR experiences, adventures, Harry Potter or whatever. And within a second, you become aware that your heartbeat is speeding up. You know that things are happening in your body. And I know as a physician that with a VR experience, you can raise somebody's blood pressure, you can give them the experience of agoraphobia, you can give them the experience of pain, you can give them the experience of joy, pleasure. If somebody is suffering from burns, you can create a VR environment that actually immediately gets rid of the pain of the burn, because the VR environment is you're in snow-clad Himalayas or whatever. So the VR experience is changing your biology. And in fact, I think in 5-10 years, when you go to a physician, they may not write a prescription. They may give you a VR session for, say, anorexia, or for eating disorder, or for a phobia, or for anxiety, but also for inflammation in the body, which is the common background in all chronic illness. Why am I saying this? The reason I'm saying this is the VR experience is changing your biology, because the biology itself is a VR experience.
Exactly.
Okay? So the biology itself is a VR experience. Now, to your question, what if we lived life as if it was multidimensional, as if everything was entangled, as if we were formless beings, as if we were the seer in the midst of the changing scenery? The changing scenery includes the body, mind, and the world.
Exactly.
What if we lived like that? And this is something I do every day. I practice, actually. I practice forms of meditation where I am convinced internally that all form and phenomena is a construction. All form and phenomena is a construction, including this. So what does this do to me? Okay, I do this practice at night for almost 2 hours before I go to sleep. I meditate on death. I do yoga nidra. I progressively move from one perceptual experience to another, and finally discard all perceptual experience, settle into formless being. This is my nightly practice, okay? 2 hours of it. Waking up, I have a good experience of this formless, timeless observer. But then as soon as I wake up, I'm caught up, right, in everything. I forget. I have no memory of the formless observer. I'm in the local experience, the play of consciousness. But there's a faint background memory that it is all my construction. And there's a kind of exhilaration that comes from that. So there's a kind of euphoria that comes from that. On a practical level, as you deepen this experience, then you lose fear of things like mortality, because you realize that mortality happens to the dreamscape, and that part of the dreamscape is the fictional character that you call Deepak Chopra. But Deepak Chopra is a fictional, moving aspect of the collective dreamscape. So that's a very, very beautiful spiritual experience. Now, from your point of view, could we live like that in this non-local, boundless being all the time? Well, in order to have experience, there is always, as you said, I look there, I ignore everything else. So to have experience is a selective act of attention and intention. This is where yogic practice come in. So if I ask you right now to put your awareness in your right foot, in your toes, as soon as you put your awareness there, your brain, your sensory cortex will have an activity. Now I ask you to wiggle your toes, and now the motor cortex will show the activity. When you're just being aware, so all experience is a selective act of attention and intention. It is both awareness of experience, it's also modulating the experience by selecting what you want to experience. And in that, you ignore everything else. You have to. In fact, that's the meaning of the word ignorance. You ignore reality to experience this focal point of selective act of interpretation and interpretation. So if you want to experience total reality, it's not possible. Okay? It's not possible perceptually. It is only experienced when we transcend all experience, including transcend thought. So again, in this wisdom tradition, every sensation, every perception, every emotion, every feeling, and every thought are the entanglement of qualia that create the dreamscape, including the fictional character, and the dreamscape is constantly transforming. It never stands still. Okay, never stands still. What is standing still is the observer. Now, taking this to the ultimate level, and there again, Don will be the expert, all this argument about general relativity and quantum mechanics, I think the argument is actually from a consciousness point of view, just different modes of knowing. That's a perceptual mode of knowing. Quantum mechanics is a more cognitive and more finer, microscopic mode of knowing. And reality is different in different modes of knowing. So reality is different in the mode of knowing that we call a caterpillar, or a mode of knowing that we call a dolphin, or a mode of knowing that we call an elephant. These are instruments, modes of knowing reality, which is infinite and formless, but in selective acts of attention with species-specific experiences, we create species-specific perceptions. And as humans, we interpret these in all kinds of ways: quantum mechanics, mathematics, science, mythology, religion. All these things have a place in giving you a glimpse of ultimate reality. So the Vedanta, the tradition I come from, says that glimpse of ultimate reality is the universal feeling I am before I'm Jennifer, or before I'm Don, or before I'm Deepak. Because in every act of perception, I am present as awareness in this object. In any object, I'm present as awareness. Without awareness, that object doesn't exist. But the awareness experiences that object in a species and culture specific way, and a modeling, which can be, the modeling can be mythological, religious, mathematical, scientific. The scientific modeling works the best because it creates technology, which is part of the dreamscape.
Wow. Well, Don, I have one question for you before we wrap up today that I would love to throw out there to you. As Deepak held up his coffee cup, it just occurred to me, what Deepak's saying is that reality is happening because we're saying that reality is happening within this construct. In your book, The Case Against Reality, you talk about how we're not seeing the truth. Is it possible, using our perception and our brains, to cause Deepak's coffee cup to become something other than a coffee cup? What would it take, and is that even possible, given that what we're seeing is not necessarily the truth of Deepak's coffee cup, let alone the truth of life? What is possible with our brains? Have neuroscientists and neurocognitions been able to explore that? And what would it take for us to get to a place where nothing exists and everything exists, and coffee cup might not be coffee cup anymore? Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah, there's answers to that at several levels. From the neuroscience point of view, we know that there are, I think we've mentioned synesthesia, people with synesthesia, right? So about 4% of the population, depending on who's doing the statistics, roughly 4% of the population has some form of synesthesia, where there's aspects of the world that they perceive very, very differently from what the rest of us perceive. So sounds have colors, numbers have colors, calendar months have positions in space, and it goes on and on. And so there's many, the one I like the best is this one guy, everything he tasted on his tongue, he felt as a three-dimensional object that he could feel with his hands in space. So mint, the taste of mint, felt like a tall, cold, smooth column of glass. Angostura bitters felt like a basket of ivy, and he could feel all the leaves of the ivy. He could feel the texture, the sponginess, the shapes. So, and he was a great cook. So his interface, his construction of reality is surprising, right? For most of us, it seems, naively, how could that even be possible? How could mint be a tall, cold, smooth column of glass that you can actually feel with your hands, even with your eyes closed? You can feel it. So we know that there's not just one interface. We have fair reason to believe that our experiences are similar, although we can never prove it. But we have clear evidence in these synesthetic experiences that there's a diversity out there. And when we go to other creatures, other animals, flies and birds and so forth, the creatures that can experience magnetic fields or electric fields, right? What is that even like? I mean, we have no idea what that's like. So the answer is yes, although strictly speaking, from this point of view, it's only a fiction to think that brain activity causes our experience. It's a useful fiction. For everyday neuroscience, it's perfectly fine to say area V4 causes my color experience. And I do that kind of thing myself, but strictly speaking, brains are just another creation of consciousness within a space-time framework. Strictly speaking, nothing in space and time has any causal powers, strictly speaking, nothing. But as scientists, we can ask, how does this realm of consciousness create this interface of space and time and physical objects? That's a technical question that we can answer. We can have a mathematical model of consciousness where we understand the limits of mathematics. Mathematics is not the thing that it represents. Like if I build a simulation of the weather, you won't get wet. You don't need an umbrella. When you go into the simulation room, you won't get wet. Nevertheless, we prize our mathematical simulations of the weather for what they can do. Same thing with a mathematical model of consciousness. We can understand consciousness from mathematical models, understand how we build a space-time interface with the moon and the laws of physics and so forth. And once we do that, then the deeper answer to your question is, we will have the ability to fundamentally change space-time itself. The technologies that will be unleashed are formidable. They're nothing like we've seen in the past. It's going to be a brand new level of power. It's like in the video game example, being a wizard in the game is one thing, and we all admire what a wizard can do in Grand Theft Auto. But if you actually can play with the software itself and give the wizard's car a flat tire and take the gas out of their tank and change the very parameters of the road itself, the space-time that is going in, well, the wizard has nothing compared to what you can do when you can actually change the parameters. And that's where the science is headed. When we actually understand that space-time is not fundamental, and we understand how space-time is generated. And by the way, we're making good progress on this, right? This is not just pie in the sky stuff. There is good physics now about what exists beyond space-time. Things called amplitude-hedra and associahedra and poso-Grassmannians and so. There's a lot of more work to be done, but there's really concrete work that eventually I think will lead to mind-blowing technologies where we can radically change our perceptions.
Well, thank you, Don. And Deepak, I think you have something to share.
Yeah, but before we all take off in our individual dreamscapes, the example that Don gave of synesthesia is a perfect example of entanglement of qualia. As soon as let's say I think of my mother right now, who's long gone away, right? I see her image somewhere in consciousness. I see her image. I feel the emotion. I can hear her voice, okay? And I can even experience me as a toddler sitting in her lap and get the emotions that accompany that experience, including the biological expressions of that experience, right? So entanglement of qualia is what creates everyday reality. And synesthesia is a very good example of a deviation from that everyday reality. So I've always thought that, say it's a motley group of sages, psychotics, and geniuses like Don Hoffman that actually understand how we construct reality. The rest are bamboozled by their projections. So before we kind of close down, next time maybe we can talk about a little more about multi-dimensional realities and what exists beyond space-time in the article I sent you on quantum mechanics and multi-dimensional. Maybe we can explore that. Maybe we can explore the nature of light. And if you all agree, we can call today's talk the construction of everyday reality. If Don thinks that's a good title.
Sounds great.
Brilliant.
Okay, so science conversations in cutting edge science and spirituality. Today's is the construction of everyday reality.
Perfect. I love it, guys. And I look forward to continuing this discussion. And thanks so much to everybody tuning in out there.
John, let's talk a little bit more about quantum mechanics and the models and what may exist outside of space and time.
That would be a lot of fun.
Thank you. Thank you
Sounds
very
great,
much.
guys. Have a safe drive, Deepak. Take care.
Thank you.
Well.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.